Knowing that he still believes that Kavanaugh will ultimately be confirmed. And he's also pointing out here that Kavanaugh's background has been thoroughly vetted and that he fully expects that this week-long FBI investigation won't reveal any new information that could derail this confirmation. Still, the president is very upset about this process. In particular, he is upset with Jeff Flake, who's been an irritant to the president since shortly after he was inaugurated. The president expected, after watching the hearing on Thursday, that Friday's vote would be an easy one, that the votes were in place and that he would be able to celebrate the confirmation of his new justice, and was surprised to see Flake throw this curveball. The question now is, how does President Trump respond over the next week after this investigation is fully launched? We could get that first indication in this rally that he's holding tonight in West Virginia in support, we should say, of a Senate candidate who is challenging Joe Manchin, who is a red state Democrat who could be one of the votes, Democratic votes that could vote to support Judge Brett Kavanaugh. To this point, the president has been muted in his criticism of those who've been attacking Brett Kavanaugh and bringing up these suggestions about past indiscretions. Perhaps that changes tonight in this rally. The president heading to West Virginia tonight after starting this morning at the White House. Christy and Victor.
Important day in the next few days ahead. Ryan Noble's there at the White House. Thank you.
You know, one of the big questions that a lot of people have is, how did Jeff Flake come to a new conclusion here? Remember, this started yesterday at 9:30 in the morning when he said, yes, I am going to vote to confirm. Hours later, then, demanding an FBI investigation before the final vote. What happened in between? This confrontation in an elevator. Take a look.
I was sexually assaulted and nobody believed me. I didn't tell anyone, and you're telling all women that they don't matter, that they should just stay quiet, because if they tell you what happened to them, you're going to ignore them. You have power when so many women are powerless.
Can you not give them an answer, Senator?
We have our press available.
You just released a press statement. You don't have the courage to give them an answer?
Saying thank you is not an answer. This is about the future of our country, sir.
You can be a hero today.
A lifetime appointment in the Supreme Court. That's fine. Find security. Be a hero.
Now, you just hear her voice there, but Anderson Cooper spoke with one of those protesters who confronted him in the elevator. Senator Flake there, of course. Here's what she said was going through her mind at the time.
I felt like he really needed to hear. Like, he needed to understand that women feel incredibly enraged about the thought of our stories, of our experiences of surviving sexual violence being dismissed, laughed at, disbelieved. And I think I just felt a great sense of urgency.
And I think
I saw in his face that he could not escape the emotion. And I wanted of him to really stay there and be present and think of the people he loves, think of his children, and I wanted him to be a hero.
All right, joining me now to talk about this, Errol Lewis, CNN political commentator and political anchor for Spectrum News, Joey Jackson, CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney, and Kelly Jane Torrance, deputy managing editor for The Weekly Standard. Welcome back, everyone. And Joey, let me start with you this morning. And I want to start with a statement from Senate Judiciary where they say the supplemental FBI investigation or background investigation would be limited to current credible allegations against the nominee, must be completed no later than 1 week from today. Now, how do they get to the working definition of credible here? Because there seems to be no overwhelming amount of corroborating evidence for any of the accusations. What's credible here and what isn't?
Good morning, Victor. What a difference a day makes. Needless to say, here's the point. I think credible certainly could be parsed. I think we could argue as to whether or not the other accusers are credible or they're not credible. But I think at the end of the day, you need an investigation that satisfies Senator Flake in addition to the swing votes that they need. And I think that the FBI certainly, having heard, right, as we all have heard, about, not only the fine doctor Ford, but the other accusers certainly has an obligation to do a thorough and complete investigation. I think what you see, Victor, in terms of the limitations means they're not going to go and redo every other investigation they've done concerning the 6 different times they've done so, but they're going to focus in and hone in on allegations relative to, as we look at the parameters there, what we're talking about now. And so I think they have a duty to at least interview the other women involved, in addition to, Dr. Ford and anyone who may corroborate what she has to say. And they have to put together information that satisfies those senators who have to vote, mindful of the fact that if they don't do so and it's not satisfactory, they risk losing this nominee.
Well, Kelly, Joey says that they have a duty to. They may also have a duty to follow the leads, and if it takes more than 7 days to do that, but there still is a limited window here. There are some who are cynical about this choice from Jeff Flake, although we saw that exchange with the woman there at the elevator, who say that this was not just some effort to bring the country together, but that this was a pretty clever way to try to hollow out one of the concerns from Democrats that there's no FBI investigation, give them the week to do that, and then he can defensively vote for Kavanaugh, and then bring along Collins and Murkowski and others who are on the line.
Yeah, I have to say, Victor, I'm one who tends to take a cynical view of things. And of course, Jeff Flake has been one of the big critics of Trump, and a lot of people have thought that he does so partly out of a need to present himself as a possible challenger to Trump in the primary in 2020. But in this case, I actually don't think it was cynicism. I mean, you could see the look on Jeff Flake's face when those women confronted him, as your cameras caught, and then his discussions in the Senate with friends, people he calls friends, like Senator Coons on the Democratic side. And I think, he is someone who I think takes his job very seriously. And this guy's not facing re-election, as we know. He's not running again. I mean, again, there might be that primary, but he's not facing re-election. So I think more than most people, what he is thinking of is what is right for his conscience. I mean, this guy has written a book called The Conscience of a Conservative recently, talking about what is going on in our politics now and how he feels about it. So I think he takes this very seriously. And, admittedly, this is a big win for the Democrats. I mean, the whole time on Thursday when Democrats were questioning Judge Kavanaugh, they asked him, will you ask for an FBI investigation? Why don't you want to clear your name? And, a lot of people thought Judge Kavanaugh looked bad by resisting that. And so there is no question this is a win for the Democrats. Yeah. And I don't think Jeff Flake would have just given them one for no reason. I think he really thinks that the country is being torn apart, as he told his friend Senator Coons, and he is trying in some way, whatever way he can, to try to bring an end to the unreal partisan wrangling over this.
Well, Errol, even if this is a win for the Democrats, if this investigation after a week brings no corroboration to support Dr. Ford or Ms. Ramirez or Ms. Swetnick's accusations, there's no indication that there's going to be this flood of Democrats to support Judge Kavanaugh anyway.
Not necessarily, but you got to keep in mind, Victor, you don't know what's going to happen in the course of the investigation. That while they may be asking questions about things that happened 30 plus years ago, what happens in the course of an investigation is it starts to take different turns. People start talking, witnesses come forward, they start to contradict themselves, they start to introduce the possible questions that really weren't considered before about truthfulness and about veracity. It's natural in those kind of cases, and the FBI is well known for this, to try and catch you in a lie, to sort of say, well, look, maybe I can't be sure about what happened 35 years ago, but I know what you told me 20 minutes ago doesn't square with the facts that we have in front of us. So we shouldn't be too quick to assume that this is going to yield nothing. I mean, the questions that everybody wants answered about whose version of that event back in 1982 is true, yeah, we'd all love to know about that, but there's a lot more that could be yielded by this. And I think Democrats are taking that admittedly long shot that something's going to come out that's going to bolster their already sort of negative feelings towards Judge Kavanaugh.
Joey, to you, this is not a criminal investigation. There are no subpoenas. There are no search warrants. To what degree does that limit their ability to get to the truth here?
You know, Victor, not at all. I think that question certainly would be more probative and relevant in the event that it was a more recent investigation where you're looking for recent evidence, et cetera. But I think here, where you're looking at allegations of 36 years ago, the FBI has their duties and responsibilities. They know that they're going to speak to one witness that may lead them to an additional witness that might lead them to an additional witness. And so while you're not having subpoenas and search warrants, you certainly have a very well-seasoned FBI. They are skilled in the process of getting to information. They've been tasked with limiting it to determining whether or not any type of sexual abuse occurred as it relates to Dr. Ford or the other two accusers. And I think even absent it not being a criminal investigation, they certainly, will do the task. If history is any guide, and if their track record is any guide, and if my dealings with them are any guide, I think they'll, do a thorough enough job to satisfy the senator's inquiries.
And Kelly, the context of the president's criticisms, his relationship with the Department of Justice and the FBI, and these accusations of deep state, I mean, those are part of this conversation, too. Is it realistic to expect that the president would put any confidence in any report that comes back to him that doesn't do anything, or let me switch that, if it shows that there is some element that corroborates Dr. Ford's claims?
Yeah, that's a great question, Victor. And I have to say, as Joy was talking, talking about how, if, track record of the FBI, they're serious. In the back of my head was, the Republicans, especially the president, have spent the last couple of years trying to undermine the FBI. And so, it is kind of funny that now they're saying, well, let's let the FBI look at it and we'll see what they have to say. And yeah, I mean, hopefully, I hope that if the FBI does find corroborating evidence, that, it's very clear what that is and who gave it to them and how it was presented. I think they're going to be very careful. I'm sure they have in mind that the entire country, if not the world, of course, is looking at this investigation. And I assume they're going to be even more careful than usual if that's possible.
All right, Kelly Jane Torrance, Errol Lewis, Joy Jackson, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor.
Well, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has agreed to meet with House Republicans in the next few weeks. He'll talk to them about his reported comments where sources say he discussed wearing a wire while talking to President Trump. Also talked about recruiting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him from office, they say. Now, House Republican leaders struck an agreement to hold this meeting to avoid a potential impeachment vote against Rosenstein.
Well, as we said, the president is asking the FBI to investigate the allegations against Judge Brett Kavanaugh. We speak with a former FBI official about how.
Okay, Alexa, ask ADT to arm my system to stay.
Armed, stay. Move-in service. Brought to you by ADT. Smart security designed and installed just for you.
The big story this morning, the FBI now investigating the allegations of sexual assault against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. So how will they go about investigating these allegations?
Yeah, let's bring in Tom Fuentes, CNN senior law enforcement analyst and the former assistant director of the FBI. Tom, so good to see you today. First and foremost, what can the FBI glean, do you think, in 1 week in a case that is really as broad as this one is?
Well, that's a good question, Christy. I think the main thing here is that you have a specific allegation, but not a specific time, date, place for the allegation to have happened. So they're going to have to start, I think, back with the witness, Ford, and try to see who she can say can corroborate her story, which was not reported to anybody for 20 years after the occurrence, apparently. So they're going to try to find out, was there a party? Was Kavanaugh at the party? Was she at the party? Did Kavanaugh assault her at the party? Who else can verify that? And then little things, she's 15, he was 17. How did she get to the party? Who drove her to the party, or was it walking distance from her home? So all of those type of things are going to be right at the beginning to try to determine what happened, if it happened, if they can. Now, if they don't find a single witness that can verify that this party took place or that Kavanaugh and Ford were ever together in this situation, they're going to be no further ahead a week from now than they are today, if that's what comes out.
Tom, some of the details that were discussed in this hearing on Thursday may not go directly to the question of that event, but elements like the yearbook and some of the reports of drinking, will those be investigated to try to understand his state of mind at the time, what his activities were when he was 17, or are those seemingly secondary, tertiary issues?
No, I think they are important issues, particularly the drinking. And I think that's what I focused in on when I was watching the hearing. And he began, describing how much he liked beer. And they always got together to watch games or at friend's house drinking beer. And he still likes drinking beer. And I thought that was a little bit over the top for a 17-year-old. And on the other hand, if Ford, as a 15-year-old, is at a party where these guys are all drinking, what's she doing there in that circumstance where she would be vulnerable? So, you have a pretty difficult to discern situation on both their parts. But I think the drinking could come up. And he was pretty definitive that he never passed out. Well, what if they come up with a witness that said, oh, yeah, I know times when he drank so much he did pass out, or he drank so much he got angry, or, had an anger management problem during a drinking episode. That could be devastating to his side, to his story.
And when you're dealing with alcohol, how do you filter through any truth that might be connected to that? Because we're talking about parties where a bunch of kids are drinking. So all of the witnesses could have been drunk.
That's true. And 36 years later, you're not going to have forensic evidence to back up anybody's good memory or bad memory. And that's where the problem also is in this story, and has been all along the past couple of weeks, is that if everybody at this party was drinking heavily, that's going to be problematic. Now, in trying to determine the credibility of both witnesses, this could also backfire the other way. What if the FBI finds out that in those days, Ford had an alcohol problem or did drugs or was promiscuous and was a party girl and liked to go to these parties and come on to older boys and that type of thing. So she could have a lot to lose in terms of her credibility, but so could Kavanaugh if it comes up that he drank to excess on a regular basis. And at the time, it wasn't legal for him to drink. He's 17 years old. It's not legal.
Tom, let me ask you about the reports, the 302s that are generated after these interviews. Who gets them? Do they typically go back to the White House, and the White House determines how the information will be disseminated? Or in this case, would they go to the members of the Judiciary Committee? Who gets the information?
Well, I think at this point, it's probably going to end up with the Judiciary Committee. But normally, background investigations are not what we would call predicated criminal investigations. In other words, the FBI is not trying to prove, gather evidence on a specific crime. In this case, they're trying to corroborate the two sides of the story. And background investigations are commissioned by the White House. And they have thousands of these ongoing across the country and around the world all the time. The White House, the president makes how many nominations? U.S. attorneys, judges, Supreme Court justices, cabinet officers and their deputies, head of the executive branch agencies, whether FBI, CIA, NASA. So all of these positions require FBI background investigations. And in the Washington field office of the FBI, you have several squads that do that full time. And then you have additional squads in almost every field division of the FBI around the country that also are continuously engaged in backgrounds. So the White House orders the backgrounds. The backgrounds then go back to the White House, the 302s, and they're not going to actually be trying to say definitively, okay, Kavanaugh's lying, okay, Ford is lying. They'll just say what they've been related, what they learned, how they learned it, who gave them the information, and provide that back. And then presuming in this case that the White House will then turn it over to the committee for their final evaluation.
Okay, so this will be the reports that go back to the White House, but we would expect, considering the point at which we are now in this process, that the White House will then give those to the Judiciary Committee. But that's not typically how this works. We'll see how it works this time around. We're a week out now from the conclusion of the investigation. Tom Fuentes, thanks as always.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
A federal judge has cleared the way now for Democrats to sue President Trump.